Pleasure to welcome Alan Hobbs, manager in the HPSU unit of Enterprise Ireland, to discuss export sales strategy. Alan, you've had a long career in supporting exporting Irish enterprises. While doing that, you've been embedded in many markets around the world, in Taiwan, Korea, in Silicon Valley, in Beijing. So you've had a huge experience of dealing with Irish businesses that are looking to export into those and into other markets. And I'd love to use this discussion to tap into some of your insights in this regard.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me on, and best of luck to everybody on the program. So, yeah, why exports? Well, there's a number of reasons, and the reason that Enterprise Ireland are so obsessed about exports is that exports means jobs in Ireland, and that's the fundamental reason that we work primarily with exporting companies. So from a company perspective, I mean, there's the obvious one of increasing sales, and what you're doing is you're increasing sales by supplying growing markets. And the reality is that in Ireland, the size of the island, the population here only has a limited market size. So you really need to start looking beyond the island of Ireland. So increasing sales will be the first and foremost reason for doing it. Increasing profits, obviously, and then an interesting one on expanding your customer base, and that's about de-risking being too reliant on one particular geography or one particular market. The other thing that people do, it spreads market risk. And if you could look at the exceptional times that we're in at the moment, there are markets that were really badly affected 8-9 months ago are now coming back. We're seeing sprouts of growth in Southeast Asia and that. Whereas if you were only focused on a singular market, well, then obviously you would have been hugely impacted. So the wider the market spread, the better. And spread that market risk. It also helps increase your competitiveness. That companies tend to be more competitive when they're competing in wider geographies. And then it can possibly give you some product life extension. So products that innovative products are only innovative for a period of time. And then obviously, if you can go into new markets or more developing markets with the original product, you might get some additional life out of your product. You can see that classical example when you look at the auto industry, and a lot of their older versions of cars started in the European, US markets, and then you saw them transfer over to parts of Asia, and maybe 15-20 years ago. That's slightly changed now, where ironically places like China are getting the first models and the earlier models of some car makers. But you can think about the older version of your product may still be applicable and relevant in some of these markets. So they're the kind of the main reasons. And the other thing, I suppose, which is not as obvious, is that when you're exposed to these markets across the world, that it can actually enhance your product offering because you get better feedback from different cohorts of customers. So it can help you develop new products or new services, and new ideas might come to help you.
Very good, Alan. So exporting, it's not just that it's right for Enterprise Ireland or it's right for Ireland Inc. It's actually right for the business as well. And even for relatively early stage businesses, for all of the reasons you say there: grow your top line, de-risk, get lots of feedback from many more markets, which will help you further go into more markets and so on. So that's a great insight. I'm an early stage business. I've developed my product. Perhaps I have some early customers here in the Irish market, early revenue streams. I think export is the next step for me. How do I decide on which markets I should be exporting into? And I'm aware that there's probably some difference between theory and practice here. So I'm also going to ask you, in practice, the clients that you work with in Enterprise Ireland, how do they actually decide on which markets they should go into?
Sure, and it varies right across sectors. It varies individuals. Some people have connections in a particular geography. They have a family member living there that might help them. But typically, most companies that we deal with, especially the smaller companies, they kind of dip their toe in the export world by going to the UK, if it's appropriate. And obviously, geographically so close, common language, very similar kind of culturally as well. So typically that will be the first port to call. But when they're looking at where do I go next, right? Because it's a pretty easy decision for somebody in Ireland to talk about the UK or think about the UK. Where do you go next? Well, I suppose it comes down to the market potential. how big is that market? And it's not a case of, you know what, if I could get 1% of the Chinese market, that's a huge number of people. That's not the way. It's more, what's the market potential for your products? And it's all about researching and doing that kind of research in advance. The other thing is the resources required. So while a market might have a massive potential, it may require significantly more resources, both time and cash. So, from a small company perspective, you need to think, well, geez, there's a great opportunity there in Brazil, but God, it's going to take up 80% of my time over the next 8 months, and I just don't have that time to give. So married with the potential, you're looking at the resources required to address or tap into that potential size, right? Then there's also the element of, is there any product development required? So you're looking at your product market fit. When I move to a different geography, a different culture, is it going to require me to do additional work on developing my product or tweaking my product? And if that's the case, well, then that'll also be factored into which country I go to next. Perhaps you'll go with the easier, the lower lying fruit, I suppose, or the easier markets to address with your current product offering. And then I guess you also need to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. So you need to be kind of able to marry the strong elements of your product and your company to the markets that fit those strengths best. The other thing to consider is whether there's any regulatory or legal issues. So, will your product, is it approved for sale? So we did a lot of life sciences. So you might have CE mark here for Europe, and that's fine, but you go to the US, you're going to need FDA approval. You go to China, you're now going to need CDA approval. So there are various different kind of regulatory considerations to put in place, and how difficult it is to achieve those regulatory approvals will factor in which prioritized markets you're going to have. You'll have language requirements, obviously. You can't expect everyone to speak English, although that is the business language. Realistically, if you're trying to talk to consumers, you need to have specialist language supports and help. Then you also need to look at currency implications and trade practices. So is it easy to get money out of a country that you're going to target? Is that currency readily transferable or exchangeable into dollar, euro, sterling type currencies? And then are there any barriers? So do the governments, have they set up any trade barriers? Who knows what's going to happen in the UK next year? What industries are going to be affected? What barriers are going to be put in place? So you're kind of looking at the legal, the regulatory, economic, social, technical kind of barriers to trade as well. So a lot of those kind of different areas you need to factor in to see, well, where am I going to go next? And there's an awful lot of work to be done on that, and it's all about research,
Wow.
which interestingly we can help with.
Indeed, and we will get on to the supports that are available from Enterprise Ireland. But in your response there, Alan, there is just so many things there that I suspect not many or almost any early stage entrepreneurs could possibly have thought of. And, it just underlines that going into export markets, it's a huge commitment, and it's something that you need to do in a very deliberate manner. You don't hop out of bed one morning and decide that you're going to enter the North American market or something. There's a lot of considerations to put behind it, and you've elucidated that very, very well. Okay, so I've decided that there is a particular market I'd like to go into, but 18 months ago I might have been a one-man operation out of working out of my spare bedroom, and now I'm talking about going into this market. What are the milestones that I need to have hit before I can confidently say, yeah, I'm ready to take this on?
It's hard to pinpoint them generically for everyone, but the obvious things are product market fit. Is the product or the service that you're selling, is it a fit for the market that you're going after? From a milestone perspective, is it regulated? But then do you have the necessary approvals? Because you're not going to be able to go in and sell something that's not approved for sale in that market. You need to do some market research. You need to get some customer feedback, get some kind of input from them. You need to look at different changing face of customers, really, and this applies globally. You look at the move to digital and think about, again, in the current pandemic situation, how our lives have changed and what products have actually become much more important to us. All of a sudden, the entire staff of Enterprise Ireland are communicating over Microsoft Teams. Prior to March this year, it was probably less than 2 or 3% of people that knew how to use it or knew that it existed. Zoom is obviously there as well. You can see the kind of change there from a digital. You can also see that we're working in a global village. The supply chain is phenomenal. Look at the amount of parcels we're having delivered to our homes now. Look we're doing rather than going into the city center to a kind of a retail bricks and mortar type store. When you look at that, it's a global village, but that means it's global competition. So while you can go digital and go global from your home in Ireland, the reverse is also true. And people can go after your customers from anywhere else. We've had a phenomenal number of companies that want to set up mask manufacturing. That's been replicated all over Europe. So all of a sudden, while you think, well, I have a connection here that can get me machinery and raw material, there's an obvious market demand there. The reality is, so does everybody else have access to that. So you need to kind of bear that in mind as well. So global village means global competition. And while you might be involved in business to business type sale, I think still firmly believe, and it's ironic currently because we haven't met many people face to face. I think B2B is also F2F, so face to face. You cannot dismiss the value of a face-to-face interaction, and especially when that's a first-time interaction or first time to build up a relationship. Yes, you can continue on building relationships with people you've already met, but whether it's down to Cork or Beijing or San Francisco, you behave the same way. Like, you're not going to go and buy something from somebody down the road without having met them or seen the product. So you should also bear that in mind. People won't expect to do that unless they know and trust you and trust your company as well. So they're kind of things that you need to be factoring, not so much milestones, but more considerations on it.
Which touches on the next question I have for you, which sounds like a rather silly question to be asking, but how do I export? It might be the case that here in Ireland, I'm selling to my customers by online or knocking on doors or face-to-face or through retail outlets. But it may not be the case that I'm going to use the same channel when I go into some other export market. What are the channels that I need to consider when I'm going into other markets?
So again, that's peculiar to whatever country you're going to address. You may require, in some parts of the world, you may have to have a local office on the ground. You may have to have local operations, local bank accounts in order to be compliant. There's certain restrictions on trading. So when you look at how am I going to export, it's not a case of I try and interact with somebody globally, remotely over Zoom or whatever, and then just ship the product to them. There's the obvious things in terms of it's a service. It's a little easier to transfer the service or the license or the code. Physical product, you need to look at what's the best way of dealing with that particular challenging market. Is it my own standalone office? Do I need my own team there? Do I need my own staff on the ground? Do I need a customer service support, all that kind of stuff? Or for smaller companies, typically they're thinking, well, listen, I need a good representative on the ground. I need a good partner. I need a good distributor representing my products. Then you need to consider, are they the right distributor? Do they have competing products? Are your products going to offer them better margins? Which ones are they going to push? Do I need somebody locally there to push the distributor, to push their sales teams, to push my products? Or can I do that from a distance? Unlikely. I would always be a great believer when I worked overseas in Asia and the US that regular and frequent visits to the market are how you build up trust and how you build up experience and also knowledge. And it's how you develop a relationship, a true relationship. And when you gather that trust and that relationship builds, well, then you can find that you don't need to go as regular and as frequent to those markets, that you have somebody there almost as good as your own team on the ground. That needs to be considered. Then is if there is digital ways of doing it, great, that makes it easier. But for physical products, there's a huge complication and a lot of big decisions need to be taken.
Very good. Alan, my last question to you. Can you give us a brief overview of the kind of supports that are available from Enterprise Ireland for exporting businesses?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I'd like to highlight, I'll just try and get it up on the screen, but I won't share the screen with you. And that's we have an exporting preparedness scorecard. Okay. So this is a way for you to go online and give you a sense of, am I ready to export? And it starts off with 5 or 6 pillars where they ask 2 or 3 simple questions, and it's a yes no answer, and they can come back with a kind of an areas that you need to work on and so on. So do you have a written business plan? You've developed you have an ambition to export. Do you have support staff to support this export journey? Do any of the management team or key employees have international experience? Have you undertaken the market research to validate the potential? Do your products have a unique selling point in those particular markets? And then you're kind of looking at, have you considered the regulatory, the labeling, compliance standards, that kind of stuff? Do you have capacity? If you have an increase in demand for your products, can you actually produce them and deliver them on time to the quality that people expect? And then you're looking at, are there any logistical requirements and lead times that may to be factored in to where you're delivering a product in these markets? So there's that scorecard is quite useful, and that can be taken off our website. So if you Google Enterprise Ireland Exporter Scorecard, that'll come up straight away for you to have a look at. But in terms of then how EI can support, well, we've about almost 40 overseas offices now. So I think we're opening 11 this year, and a lot of them have been opened, not formally, but we've just recently opened in Hanoi, and we opened in Scotland. I think we've opened one in the western part of Canada. I think we're in Toronto and not Vancouver, I think. So there's about 40 overseas offices with experts in those markets ready to help you. So the practical support from people on the ground here. So if you're at a very, very early stage, you're pre-investment, well, then we kind of have export-ready workshops, and Sprint covers part of that, obviously. We have a market research centre, and that's located primarily in East Point, but accessed via any of the regional offices. And we have expert librarians working there to help you access the right databases and the information that you need to do your research on a particular market. We have the Essentials of Exporting workshop. We have exporter development workshops. We have feasibility grants up to 15K, and that can be given to individuals who are looking at a market for the first time. And then we have International Markets Week, which is a big event that we host every September, and we bring back all of our overseas offices with the experts to arrange one-on-one meetings for clients. This year, interestingly, will be done virtually, so it's a big experiment that hopefully will go well. I think it will. And then when you look at post investment, so when Enterprise Ireland has made an investment in the company, they've got their seed round funding completed, there's more substantial type of grant supports to help companies, and the main one is called the Market Discovery Fund, and this can be up to 75,000 euros in grant for a company to really develop an export market, and it allows you to pay for salaries, travel, subsistence, the engaging with consultants and so on. A really, really strong financial support for companies in new markets. Then we have a grad start initiative where we pay half the price of taking on grads to help you with your export marketing. I mentioned the overseas offices are there, and then, well, this year excluded, we have trade missions on a regular basis to these markets. So a great way of going in and making a big impact as a small company when you're part of a larger group and you have the weight of a government minister with you that helps open up more doors that can be perceived very strongly by your potential partners or customers in these markets. And then we have a whole raft of consultants that we engage with in markets where we do not have our own offices, so they're called pathfinders. So a lot of supports there for companies, and encourage you to reach out via your development advisor. It's always good to go through your DA, so they have the holistic view of how your company are doing and where you're strategically targeting, and they can be very, very supportive in that regard.
Very good. Alan, there's a huge amount there for any business thinking of exporting to think about, but also a huge number of supports, as you've said, available from Enterprise Ireland to help people achieve success. Alan Hobbs from Enterprise Ireland, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks, Martin.